Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to introduce a man whose energy and focus has, I think, really resulted in a historic focus on Southeast Asia. His work with Secretary Clinton and the Obama team, I think, by all accounts, have sort of transformed our relationship with Southeast Asia. A key to that effort early on was the vision to find a way to engage Myanmar, move that relationship forward, because a weak Myanmar means a broken relationship with ASEAN. And I would give Kurt credit. I've been involved in the mix, watching from outside at how the energy and the enthusiasm he and his team have been putting into this. And I want to say that, whether I personally think it was, we heard from Jim Webb this morning. I think Kurt, Jim Webb, and a handful of others were the guys who, with the vision and the courage on this side to move at least U.S. policy forward. And certainly we've talked a lot about the heroes on the side over in Myanmar. But please join me in welcoming the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and the Pacific, Kurt Campbell.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Ernie. Very gracious remarks, and I think it's very important to give credit where credit is due. And in fact, as I arrived in the room today, I saw a lot of people who have really devoted their lives to the situation in Burma and Myanmar, and I want to pay tribute to them. People who've worked in human rights groups, people who've supported ASEAN, those who have a long-standing love of the country. We were able to celebrate a little bit last week when Aung San Suu Kyi accepted the Congressional Medal of Honor. I can rarely remember an opportunity where I felt so excited and hopeful about a set of circumstances. I think if you work on the world, it is easy to be occasionally concerned, depressed, worried about prospects in any number of places. This is one of the few areas that I can point to in which there is some, I think, sincere, genuine enthusiasm and hope for the future, and the progress that has taken place, strong partnership between Democrats and Republicans in the United States, but probably more importantly between the executive and legislative branches. When you search for opportunities to see the full range and scope of people that are engaged on an issue, to have the opportunity to work together and then to do so, it's exciting. And I have to say, last week, many of you might have been in the rotunda in the Capitol when Aung San Suu Kyi received her award. Aung Min from the government, from Naypyidaw, was there. He was one of the first to greet her, to remark about what a remarkable achievement that was. She referred to her partners all last week in the executive branch and the legislative branch. Many of the people that she sits next to on the bench are people who had imprisoned her or had a very difficult relationship with for decades. And in fact, I think many of the bitter partisans in our own country up on Capitol Hill looked at that example and thought to themselves, this is an example of how we might actually be inspired as well. And so I was excited to see this transpire. I have to say, though, it's not enough to rest on what's transpired. The real challenge is what comes next. And what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes today to go through what I think are some of the challenges that we have before us and opportunities, and give you a sense at least of how we're thinking about wanting to go forward in terms of taking advantage of what really is an historic opening. But this historic opening has a number of challenges with it. And I think what we have seen in the short term is that hopes and expectations have risen rather dramatically in the rank and file, in the city dwellers, in some of the larger cities. But in fact, the set of circumstances in terms of GNP, performance, all the challenges in terms of rule of law, investment, very little has actually changed yet on the ground. And so there is this gap, as is always the case in circumstances of the early phases of reform, where there's more hope than reality to sustain it. And so one of the things that we have to recognize is that this is actually the period ahead is a critical environment for the United States and partner countries. And again, one of the great successes, I think, of the last several years, begun very effectively in the Bush administration, is a degree of engagement with partner countries in ASEAN, in Asia in generally, with Australia, New Zealand, and Europe, to coordinate our efforts. And even though we're in a very different new period, the level of engagement with Europe, with these other countries on Burma, on Myanmar, has remained very tight and quite intense. And how we work together on the challenges ahead will say a lot about our ultimate effectiveness. So I think the first thing that we have to recognize is that we are at the very earliest stages of the reform effort. And I don't think there can be any doubt, at least in my view, about the sincerity of the effort. Spent a lot of time with the government. I think, as you all know, last week's visit, extremely high profile here in Washington, Aung San Suu Kyi, but an equally important set of visits are ongoing now. Secretary Clinton tomorrow, senior members of the U.S. government will be meeting with the president, Thein Sein, up in New York. Am I supposed to see something there? No.
No.
Sorry. Okay. Thein Sein up in New York. We'll have other engagements. It's very important for us to indicate quite clearly that we respect and admire the steps that have been taken. More needs to be done, but clearly this is an important effort that requires our public embrace, and we will do so. And we will continue to acknowledge his and other efforts that have taken place. The Secretary Clinton made that very clear in her address at the Rotunda last week. So I think the public stance of sustaining efforts, broad-based efforts at reform, will continue to be the order of the day inside our administration and in everything that we have sought to do. And hope it will be that will continue on, whoever's in power. The truth is that this is really not a situation where anyone can rest on laurels, early laurels, or take victory laps. This is really a time for rolling up the sleeves and doing the hard work. I think one of the most important efforts in terms of the next steps will be working with the U.S. business community on thinking about responsible investment inside the country. And we are doing what we can in our interactions with Capitol Hill and others to both educate and engage a broad and very intense interest in the American business community to look carefully at opportunities inside the country and to encourage them, and also work with key partners on Capitol Hill on sanctions easing and other steps that will be taken. Last week, Aung San Suu Kyi was unequivocal and very clear that she believes that the time for sanctions is over, and that it's time that burden be placed now on the people of the country, and that we can best serve the effort of reform by working with the Parliament and other instruments and institutions inside the government to support the kinds of legislations and actions that will support transparency and responsible investment going forward. I think she also made a very clear plea for the United States to move forward so that we can not only not vote against, but also support actively work in the international financial institutions and the multilateral development banks. And I think you all know that we saw some substantial progress in the immediate aftermath of Aung San Suu Kyi being here last week. So Congress responded to her calls in that regard, and I think we'll be working closely with Capitol Hill on next steps. She also indicated that a lifting of the import embargo would be an important sign that certain kinds of investment and manufacturing and other kinds of activities inside the country would be welcomed by the United States and supported. And I think we've heard that message very clearly. But as important as anything else is a recognition that this is going to be very early days for the U.S. business community. And the hope will be that we'll have a multiplicity of effort. Clearly, those companies that are involved in extractive industries, that will be an important component of the inheritance and the desire for the country to have a more prosperous future. But I think the hope is to extend American investment, business engagement into areas that will lead to greater employment, training, diversity of the economy, into tourism, manufacturing, services, and the like. And I think there are a number of exciting opportunities in that regard, but it will be hard and challenging. And I just want to let all of you know that our office, although we're at the State Department, other places are responsible more directly for commerce, we are completely open for business in terms of helping American firms and groups who want to be involved, not just in Burma, but in Southeast Asia. If you call us, we will be in touch with you immediately. And I defy anyone who has not been able to get an appointment or get advice from us. I want to let you know that our offices are open, and my office is open. I will help. I will do what I can to encourage responsible engagement, as the Secretary has done going forward. That is one of the issues that we're going to talk about tomorrow when the Secretary meets with the President. We have some specific initiatives. He is extremely interested in what we can do to encourage that next phase of our engagement. A third area that I think we have to recognize, and it was underscored in many of the statements that the Secretary and Aung San Suu Kyi and others made last week, and that is there are continuing human rights issues inside the country that require attention and that we will not be silent on. There are a number of political prisoners that we want to see unconditionally released. We want any restrictions on those who have been their sentences lifted to be completely lifted, and we want to create opportunities for many of the people who've left prison. This is an unfamiliar and challenging new environment. We want to create opportunities for training and engagement, not only in the public sector but elsewhere. We're working with a number of groups on that, but we recognize that these issues are important and that we will be a continuing voice urging reform and opening efforts along these lines. We've been encouraged by steps to date, but more needs to be done. I think it is also the case that the key issue that lies at the heart, really, of further progress inside the country has to do with one of the thorniest, most challenging set of issues that confront the country, and that's the issue of ethnic reconciliation. That really touches every part of the country, every aspect of life inside Burma today. And I will tell you that in the past, when we have touched on these issues in discussions, both with opposition leaders and with government officials, it's been extraordinarily difficult and very opposed to outside interference or engagement in those matters. Because of the welcome and the engagement that I think that the leaders from Naypyidaw and Rangoon have received over the course of the last several months, the warmth and the intensity of the support from the United States, there is much greater interest on the part of all sectors inside the country to hear from us about ideas and suggestions about how to support the reconciliation process. And I think there's a recognition that merely ceasefires and temporary steps are not enough. We need a more thoroughgoing effort that will probably involve it will probably involve not just people inside the country, but support groups from outside. We have made clear that we would support that effort appropriately, but we want to do so in a way that is sensitive to the sensibilities that exist inside the country. And there's enormous anxiety, again, about the potential for interference on matters that are considered to be at the heart of sovereignty and national identity inside the country. However, there is an openness that I want to underscore that has never existed before, and we intend to explore those opportunities working with friends in Europe and friends in ASEAN. More to come in this space. And there is a clear recognition that this is at the heart of true progress inside the country. And I just want to underscore those. There are many people in the audience that are involved in some of these efforts, and we think that there is enormous possibilities. And we have been, in the course of the last several months, not just engaging with the government, but engaging much more actively with a number of ethnic groups, their leadership, and others about what's necessary to secure a lasting peace inside the country, what kinds of autonomy arrangements, what kinds of power sharing, what kinds of institutional cooperation is possible that will allow the country to prosper into the 21st century. Another issue that we think is going to be important is not just what Burma, what Myanmar does inside the country, but how it engages with the outside world. So we've been remarkably pleased by the kinds of contacts that are already emerging, not just between Burma and ASEAN, but Burma and the outside world. Much more engagement in the ASEAN Regional Forum and the East Asia Summit that you might expect. They are coming to the table with ideas. We believe that it will be important for other international partners, including the United States, to work with the country on a whole range of multilateral pursuits. And here, the issue, frankly, is to make clear to the leadership that you are known by the company you keep. There have been initial positive steps to end or curtail the relationship between Burma and North Korea. We want those steps to continue. We want other countries to stand in to develop a better and different kind of relationship with the country. What we have seen, for instance, in South Korea, we've coordinated very closely with them. South Korea is stepping in to support the country in ways that North Korea never could. And I think there is a deep recognition inside NAPIDA that this set of relationship belongs in the old regime, not in the new country. And we're very hopeful about that. Senator Lugar and his team, Senator Webb, have been very strong on this. We insist on these steps going forward. And I think we'll continue to make this case. We've been pleased with what we've seen, but again, more needs to be done in this regard. I think it would be also fair to say that for the United States truly to be effective in other countries, it will not be enough to engage simply bilaterally or in multilateral diplomatic settings. What will be absolutely essential is for the international financial institutions and the multilateral development banks to work on appropriate programs for health, for education, for other aspects of infrastructure inside the country that some aspects of business investment just won't initially touch. And we will work appropriately on these efforts. Again, more to come very shortly. We have in mind a few ambitious ideas of how we can help bring together other partners and to apply leverage support as we go forward. Let me also say that we are now at a point in the relationship where we have to start thinking about how to structure our interactions. It's time for more formalized bilateral dialogues, other kinds of engagements with the officials. We are seeing a proliferation of engagement of nonprofit organizations, of Track 2, Track 1.5. Frankly, we believe in let the flowers bloom in this regard. The more engagement, the better. But as important as all of that is, it will be critical for us to engage with key components inside the government. We think having a dialogue on foreign policy issues with the key players inside the executive branch makes enormous good sense, and we're moving in that direction. Aung San Suu Kyi was very clear that there needed to be a robust dialogue between Congress and Parliament. And I was thrilled to see, even with the departure of the stalwarts of Southeast Asia, Senator Lugar, Senator Webb, Senator Lieberman, several other senators and congressmen stepped up and said, sign me up. I want to be engaged with that. That is enormously helpful because what we are seeing is really the parliament coming to life. I think we can all have concerns about the election in 2010, but the performance that we are seeing of late suggests the beginnings of real procedures, real checks and balances that, again, imperfect but important, and an institution that we can work with going forward. And lastly, I think one of the institutions that has largely been left out of the engagement has been the military, and they play a critical role still inside the country. A lot of uncertainties about what their attitudes are to reform, and particularly what their role is in the prosecution of existing violence still on the ground, terrible violence in the ethnic areas. I think it's going to be important that we engage responsibly with them, but before we do so, we need to have the kind of dialogue with Capitol Hill, with key interlocutors, to make sure that we do not extend beyond what is defensible, what I think is appropriate for our national interests. And I think we're beginning those discussions on Capitol Hill. The advantage of what we have done to date is that at every step of this step-by-step process, we've consulted closely with key stakeholders in the nonprofit world on Capitol Hill. Although there have been disagreements, generally speaking, there has been transparency and openness about our strategy forward. I wanted to just lay out to you what we are thinking about next steps in this regard. I think you will see a very high level of revolutions in our overall engagement in the weeks and months ahead. And I really want to thank all of you who've been engaged in this for your efforts. I've rarely worked with a group of people who quietly, on all sides inside the country, are more excited about the future than the people of Burma today. And it is incumbent on us to see that we can support them the best we can so that they can fulfill their destiny. Let me stop here. I'm happy to take questions. I know that there are going to be a number of people that have interests in questions about territorial issues. I refer you back to my comments about 10 days ago here at the session. I think I won't have as much to say on this. I'd like, if at all possible, to spend our time today talking about Burma or Southeast Asia if we could. So thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you. Again, same rules, just your name and where you're from. Patricia, we'll start with you.
Clap. Kurt, I want to congratulate you and the Secretary of State and your whole team, Joe, Patrick, and everybody, for brilliant management of the transition in U.S. policy during a very challenging and difficult period. My question is, have you been talking with the Congress at all about relaxing the restrictions on U.S. assistance to the government and capacity building with the government? Is there something underway on this front? Because I think that's an area that we obviously need to look at very closely.
Again, credit where credit due. So many other people for years, including Francis, have played a more important role. And I thank you for your comments, but I think you know the role that you've played in this effort. I think it would be fair to say that on every issue right now, we have a running dialogue and discussion with the Congress. I've tried to come up with the right kind of metaphor for how you go about dealing with the sanctions that have been basically placed on Burma now for about 20 years. I've mentioned this before in other settings. There are few countries in the world who've had as many sanctions levied against it for a whole host of reasons, legitimate, but the fact is that they are intertwining, overlapping with different agencies involved, extraordinarily complex. It has taken us, frankly, months to understand the full nature, where you can ease, where executive orders can apply, where there needs to be actually congressional action. In some areas, it will require acts of Congress. That will be very difficult, obviously, in this environment. The hope is that after Aung San Suu Kyi was here and her call for progress in a number of these areas, that we will be able to sustain this bipartisan support going forward. But it will be challenging, no doubt. We are having discussions with the government on capacity building and how we can support in a number of areas. And they are hungry for that engagement, and that's one of the issues I'm glad you raised that Secretary Clinton will be speaking about with the President and his team tomorrow. I think one of the things that we have seen of late is that the President is pulling more of his team closer to him within presidential offices and around that. But it is also clear when you talk to every group inside the country is the question, has the spirit or the activities of reform trickled down? Has it really reached provincial and other areas? And the truth is, for this effort to be successful, it's going to take that overall process to go further and faster than it has to date. Part of what we can do is assist that through some of these training initiatives. And that's one of the reasons why we'd like to see other institutions, academic and the like, who do various programs of support, executive training, to be engaged, and we are very encouraging of that effort going forward. There is going to be, and we're right on the verge of it now, a absorption problem inside the country. There is it's a small number of people doing a lot of different things. They're overwhelmed with the number of visitors and the like, and you can see it among all the key institutions and individuals inside the country, ranging from the opposition to the government. And so putting more mechanisms in place, getting other people, what we have is a small number of people who meet a large number of foreign visitors. What we need is a larger number of people across the government and across civil society that are engaging more on the international scene. And what we need to help support that, so that you don't think just of one or two people when you think of the country. You think of a broad network of people engaged.
Elizabeth Hernandez with Hewlett Packard.
7 more minutes.
I just wanted to let you know that I just came back from a mission to Naypyidaw last month, and I wanted to let you know that your ambassadors, both Ambassador Edelman in Singapore and Ambassador Mitchell, will be involved, are true leaders there and advocates.
They really are.
You said about being open for business. They definitely get it.
And I have to say, we've all been in various walks of life and had those situations where you try to call someone and like they don't have time, or it's not important, or you're not important. I have to say, I've never heard that once from any ambassador, from anyone engaged in Southeast Asia. There's a real sense that if you need help and you want advice, you want support, and frankly, the tone is set from the President and the Secretary on down, and I've been very grateful for that. And ultimately, if we can't succeed on the business and corporate and efforts in Southeast Asia, it's hard for us to be successful in other areas as well. Sorry I interrupted you.
We will be helping you on that front, because the American business community in Thailand and Singapore are actually organizing to have an AmCham in Myanmar by November 7th.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you, we're going to talk to the President about that, and I was going to mention this, but we have talked with a number of companies. We want an AmCham. We want it established. We want the whole deal, offices,
Exactly.
cards, people engaged, the whole thing on an active basis, and we need to see more people on the ground there.
Well, we're definitely working on that, and sorry, but I do have a question.
Sure.
Because when I look at the business opportunity in Myanmar today, a big part of it is the public sector.
Yeah.
Right, especially in infrastructure and in information communications technology. And one of the tricky part is the SDN list, because like from that mission, for example, we collected a number of cards, 70 plus cards, and easily when we ran it through the database, 30 of those names were actually on the list. So as we move forward on engaging and also looking at the business opportunity, how do you think the American business community should navigate that, and how do you expect us to kind of work around that list? Because it's a pretty extensive list.
It's such a good question, and it's such a hard question because obviously there are people on that list that we believe fundamentally should not be involved in the new business opportunities inside the country. There are also going to be changes as that list evolves. We find ourselves on almost a weekly basis getting suggestions for people who should be taken off the list and people who should be added, right? But ironically, more people taken off, and we get that even from the opposition, even very prominent opposition players. I think my recommendation on this is that the list is particular when it comes to being involved in direct business investments and activities, but it doesn't, I think engagement, dialogue, and discussion is allowed, and that when in doubt, raise those issues with both the government and the Treasury Department. I think this will take a substantial amount of time as we go forward. And the truth is that this space is going to evolve rapidly. And this gets back to the question that was asked about how do you go about this. The list, which frankly will be with us for a substantial period of time, has to reflect the new realities inside the country and not inhibit the kind of investments and reform that we want to see take place. I have to say, Aung San Suu Kyi is remarkably forgiving. She sits next to the man who jailed her, who wrote the papers, and she says, we have a wonderful relationship. I'm not sure I could be so open-spirited. Still, U.S. law applies here. We have to be very careful. Anything we do will be done in extraordinarily close consultation with Congress, and we recognize that there are ongoing problems, atrocities, and issues that we cannot be blind to.
Got to stick with Southeast Asia now.
It's all right.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm Chin Yi-chan with Phoenix TV. Aung San Suu Kyi gave a speech in the other day at Institute of Peace, and before she talks about the U.S.-Myanmar relations, she talked about China-Myanmar relations. So from your perspective, I would like to know how you see the future U.S.-China-Myanmar relations might go. And also, so I would like to get your opinion on China putting its first aircraft carrier into service during the tide of tension at South China Sea. Thank you very much.
Sneaky there a little bit. So let's take that first part of that question. Look, in almost all of our engagements with the government, with the opposition, there is a very strong view which we support, that Burma, Myanmar, wants and needs a good relationship with China. They want an equitable, strong relationship on commercial grounds. They want to be respected and engaged appropriately politically, and to work closely in diplomatic channels. And I think we support that, and we think that is in the best interests of both countries. We also want a good relationship between Burma and India, and Burma and its other Asian interlocutors. It sits at an important crossroads. It will continue to play a vital role. In truth, when we have engaged the country, we have our own history with Burma. We had problems and challenges long before China's rise, more recent rise, and we have had important conversations both with China about the goals and objectives of our engagement, and we've made very clear to the government in Naypyidaw of our hope and expectation that they will maintain close and friendly ties with China. There are a number of issues that they're engaging on, certain kinds of economic engagements, dams and timber, and we think those economic engagements, the government has a right to ask for more transparency, and we support that overall effort, and I think China does as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Kurt Campbell for his